The following narration of the book contains abundance of gore, violence, and even a good doses of harsh language of the events taking place in the Lost World novel. Viewer discretion is advised.
It is now 6 years since the secret disaster at Jurassic Park. 6 years since the extraordinary dream of science and imagination came to a crashing end. The dinosaurs destroyed, the park dismantled, the island indefinitely closed to the public. There are rumors that something has survived.
The late 20th century has witnessed a remarkable growth in scientific interest in the subject of extinction. It is hardly a new subject. Baron Georges Cuvier had first demonstrated that species became extinct back in 1786, not long after the American Revolution. Thus, the fact of extinction had been accepted by scientists for nearly 3/4 of a century before Darwin put forth his theory of evolution. And after Darwin, the many controversies that swirled around his theory did not often concern issues of extinction. On the contrary, extinction was generally considered as unremarkable as a car running out of gas. Extinction was simply proof of failure to adapt. How species adapted was intensely studied and fiercely debated. But the fact that some species failed was hardly given a second thought. What was there to say about it? However, beginning in the 1970s, two developments began to focus attention on extinction in a new way. The first was the recognition that human beings were now very numerous and were altering the planet at a very rapid rate, eliminating traditional habitats, clearing the rainforest, polluting air and water, perhaps even changing global climate. In the process, many animal species were becoming extinct. Some scientists cried out in alarm, others were quietly uneasy. How fragile was the Earth's ecosystem? Was the human species engaged in behavior that would eventually lead to its own extinction? No one was sure. Since nobody had ever bothered to study extinction in an organized way, there was little information about rates of extinction in other geological eras. So scientists began to look closely at extinction in the past, hoping to answer anxieties about the present. The second development concerned new knowledge about the death of the dinosaurs. It had long been known that all dinosaur species had become extinct in a relatively short time at the end of the Cretaceous era, approximately 65 million years ago. Exactly how quickly those extinctions occurred was a subject of long-standing debate. Some paleontologists believed they had been catastrophically swift. Others felt the dinosaurs had died out more gradually, over a period of 10,000 to 10 million years, hardly a rapid event. Then, in 1980, physicist Luis Alvarez and 3 co-workers discovered high concentrations of the element iridium in rocks from the end of the Cretaceous and the start of the Tertiary, the so-called KT boundary. The Cretaceous was shorthanded as K to avoid confusion with the Cambrian and other geological periods. Iridium is rare on Earth, but abundant in meteors. Alvarez's team argued that the presence of so much iridium in rocks at the KT boundary suggested that a giant meteorite, many miles in diameter, had collided with the Earth at that time. They theorized that the resulting dust and debris had darkened the skies, inhibited photosynthesis, killed plants and animals, and ended the reign of the dinosaurs. This dramatic theory captured the media and public imagination. It began a controversy which continued for many years. Where was the crater from this meteor? Various candidates were proposed. There were 5 major periods of extinction in the past. Had meteors caused them all? Was there a 26 million year cycle of catastrophe? Was the planet even now awaiting another devastating impact? After more than a decade, these questions remained unanswered. The debate raged on until August 1993, when at a weekly seminar at the Santa Fe Institute, an iconoclastic mathematician named Ian Malcolm announced that none of these questions mattered, and that the debate over a meteoric impact was a frivolous and irrelevant speculation.
Consider the numbers. On our planet, there are currently 50 million species of plants and animals. We think that is a remarkable diversity, yet it is nothing compared to what has existed before. We estimate that there have been 50 billion species on this planet since life began. That means that for every 1,000 species that have ever existed on the planet, only 1 remains today. Thus, 99% of all species that ever lived are extinct, and mass killings account for only 5% of that total. The overwhelming majority of species die one at a time. The truth was that life on Earth was remarked by a continuous, steady rate of extinction. By and large, the average lifespan of species was 4 million years. For mammals, it was 1 million years. Then the species vanished. So the real pattern was one of species rising, flourishing, and dying out in a few million years. On average, 1 species a day had become extinct throughout the history of life on Earth. But why? What led to the rise and declines of Earth's species in a 4 million year life cycle? One answer is that we do not recognize how continuous active our planet is. Just in the last 50,000 years, a geological blink of an eye, the rainforest has severely contracted, then expanded again. Rainforests aren't an ageless feature of the planet. They're actually rather new. As recently as 10,000 years ago, when there were human hunters on the American continent, an ice pack extended as far down as New York City. Many animals became extinct during that time. So the most Earth's history show animals living and dying against very active background. That probably explained 90% of extinction. If the seas dry up or become more salty, then of course ocean planktons will all die. But complex animals like dinosaurs are another matter, because complex animals have insulated themselves, literally and figuratively, against such changes. Why do complex animals die out? Why don't they adjust? Physically, they seem to have the capacity to survive. There appears to be no reason why they should die, and yet they do. What I wish to propose is that complex animals become extinct not because of the changes of their physical adaptation to their environment, but because of their behavior. I would suggest that the latest thinking in chaos theory, or nonlinear diamatics, provides tentaneously hints to how this happens. It suggests to us that behavior of complex animals can change very rapidly, and not always for the better. It suggests that behavior can cease to be responsive to an environment and lead to decline and death. It suggests that animals may stop adapting. Is this what happened to the dinosaurs? Is this the true cause of their disappearance? We may never know. But it is no accident that human beings are so interested in dinosaur extinction. The decline of the dinosaurs allowed mammals, including us, to flourish. And that leads us to wonder whether the disappearance of dinosaurs is going to be repeated sooner or later, by us as well. Whether at the deepest level the fault lies not in blind faith, in some various meteor from skies, but in our own behavior. At the moment, we have no answer. But I have a few suggestions. The Santa Fe Institute was housed in a series of buildings on Canyon Road, which had formerly been a convent, and the Institute's seminars were held in a room which had served as a chapel. Now, standing at the podium, with a shift of sunlight shining down on him, Ian Malcolm paused dramatically before continuing his lecture. Malcolm was 40 years old, and a familiar figure at the Institute. He had been one of the early pioneers in chaos theory, but his promising career had been disrupted by a severe injury during a trip to Costa Rica. Malcolm had in fact been reported dead in several newscasts. "I was sorry to cut short the celebration in mathematician department around the country," he later said, "but it turns out I was only slightly dead. The surgeons had done wonders, as they will be the first to tell you. So now I am back. In my next iteration, you might say." Dressed entirely in black, leaning on a cane, Malcolm gave the impression of severity. He was known within the Institute for his unconventional analysis and his tendencies to pessimism. His talk that August, entitled "Life at the Edge of Chaos," was typical of his thinking. In it, Malcolm presents his analysis of chaos theory as it applied to evolution.
He could not have wished for a more knowledgeable audience. The Santa Fe Institute had been formed in the mid-1980s by a group of scientists interested in the implications of chaos theory. The scientists came from many fields: physics, economics, biology, computer science. What they had in common was a belief that the complexity of the world concealed an underlying order which had previously eluded science, and which would be revealed by chaos theory, now known as complexity theory. In the words of one, complexity theory was the science of the 21st century. The Institute had explored the behavior of a great variety of complex systems: corporations in the marketplace, neurons in the human brain, enzyme cascades within a single cell, the group behavior of migratory birds. Systems so complex that it had not been possible to study them before the advent of the computer. The research was new, and the findings were surprising. It did not take long before the scientists began to notice that complex systems showed certain common behaviors. They started to think of these behaviors as characteristic of all complex systems. They realized that these behaviors could not be explained by analyzing the components of the systems. The time-honored scientific approach of reductionism, taking the watch apart to see how it worked, didn't get you anywhere with complex systems because the interesting behaviors seemed to arise from the spontaneous interaction of the components. The behavior wasn't planned or directed. It just happened. Such behavior was therefore called self-organizing.
Of the self-organizing behaviors, Ian Malcolm said, two are of the particular interest to the study of evolution. One is adaptation. We see it everywhere. Corporations adapt to the marketplace. Brain cells adapt to signal traffic. The immune system adapt to infection. Animals adapt to their food supply. We have come to think that the ability to adapt is characteristic of complex systems, and may be one reason why evolution seems to lead towards more complex organisms. He shifted at the podium, transferring his weight onto his cane. But even more important is the way complex systems seems to strike a balance between the need for order and the impetus to change. The complex systems tend to locate themselves at a place we call the edge of chaos. We imagine the edge of chaos as a place where there is enough innovation to keep a living system vibrant and enough stability to keep it from collapsing into anarchy. If a living system drifts too close, it risks falling over into incoherency and dissolution. But if the system moves too far away from the edge, it becomes rigid, frozen, totalitarian. Both conditions lead to extinction. Too much change is a destruction as too little. Only at the edge of chaos can complex systems flourish. And, by implications, extinction is the inevitable result of one or the other strategy. Too much change or too little. In the audience, heads were nodding. This was familiar thinking to the most researchers present. Indeed, the concept of the edge of chaos was very nearly dogma at the Santa Fe Institute. Unfortunately, the gap between this theoretical construct and the fact of extinction is vast. We have no way to know if our thinking is correct. The fossil record can tell us that an animal became extinct at a certain time, but not why. Computer simulations are of limited value, nor can we perform experiments on living organisms. Thus, we are obligated to admit that extinction, untestable, unsuitable for experiment, may not be scientific subject at all. And this may explain why the subject has been embroiled in the most intense religious and political controversy. I would remind you that there is no religious debate about Avogadro's number, or Planck's constant, or the functions of the pancreas. But about extinction, there have been perpetual controversy for 200 years. And I wonder how it'll be solved if... Yes, what is it? At the back of the room, a hand had gone up, waving impatiently. Malcolm frowned, visibly annoyed. The tradition at the Institute was the questions were held until the presentation ended. It was poor form to interrupt a speaker. You had a question? Malcolm asked. From the back of the room, a young man in his early 30s stood. Actually, the man said, an observation. The speaker was dark and thin, dressed in khaki shirt and shorts. Prices in his movements and matter. Malcolm recognized him as a paleontologist from Berkeley named Levine, who was spending the summer at the Institute. Malcolm had never spoke to him, but he knew his reputation. Levine was generally agreed to be the best paleontologist of his generation, perhaps the best in the world. But most people at the Institute disliked him, finding him pompous and arrogant. I agree, Levine continued, that the fossil record is not helpful in addressing extinction, particularly if your thesis is that behavior is the cause of extinction, because bones don't tell us much about behavior. But I disagree that your behavioralist thesis is untestable. In point of fact, it implies an outcome, although perhaps you haven't yet thought of it. What's your point? Levine appeared indifferent to the tensions in the room. Just this. During the Cretaceous, dinosaurians were widely distributed across the planet. We have found their remains in various continents, and in every climatic zone, even in the Antarctic. Now, if their extinction was really the result of their behavior, and not the consequences of the cataclysm, or a disease, or a change in plant life, or any of the other broad-scale explanations that have been proposed, then it seems to me highly unlikely that they all changed their behavior at the same time, everywhere. And that in turn means that there may well be some remnants of these animals still alive on the Earth. Why couldn't you look for them? You could, Malcolm said coldly, if that amused you, and if you had no more compelling use for your time. No, Levine said eerily. I'm quite serious. What if the dinosaurs did not become extinct? What if they still exist? Somewhere in an isolated spot on the planet. You're talking about a lost world, Malcolm said, and heads in the room nodded acknowledgingly. Scientists at the Institute had developed a shorthand for referring to common evolutionary scenarios. They spoke of the field of bullets, the gambler's ruin, the game of life, the lost world, the Red Queen, and black noise. These were well-defined ways of thinking about evolution. No, Levine said stubbornly. I am speaking literally. Then you're badly deluded, Malcolm said, with a dismissive wave in his hand. He turned away from the audience and walked slowly to the blackboard. Now, if we consider the implications of the edge of chaos, we may begin by asking ourselves, what is the minimal unit of life? Most contemporary definitions of life would include the presence of DNA, but there are two examples which suggest to us that this definition is too narrow. If you consider viruses, or so-called prions, it is clear that life may in fact exist without DNA. At the back of the room, Levine stared for a moment. Then reluctantly, he sat down and began to make notes. The lecture ended. Malcolm huddled across the open courtyard of the Institute shortly after noon. Walking beside him was Sarah Harding, a young field biologist visiting from Africa. Malcolm had known her for several years since he has been asked to serve as an outside reader for her doctoral thesis at Berkeley. Crossing the courtyard in the hot summer sun, they made an unlikely pair. Malcolm, dressed in black, stood in ascetic, leaning on his cane. Harding, compact and muscular, looking young and energetic in short and t-shirt. Her short black hair pushed up on her forehead with sunglasses. Her field of study was African predators, lions and hyenas. She was scheduled to return in Nairobi next day. The two had been close since Malcolm's surgery. Harding had been on a sabbatical year in Austin and had helped nurse Malcolm back to health after his many operations. For a while, it seems as if romance had blossomed and that Malcolm, a confirmed bachelor, would settle down. But then Harding had gone back to Africa and Malcolm had gone back to Santa Fe. Whatever their former relationship had been, they were now just friends. They discussed the question that had come to at the end of his lecture. From Malcolm's point of view, there had been only predictable objections. The mass extinctions were important, that human beings owned their existence at the Cretaceous extinction, which had wiped out the dinosaurs and allowed the mammals to take over. As one questioner had pompously phrased it, the Cretaceous allowed our own sentient awareness to arise on the planet. Malcolm replies was immediate. What makes you think human beings are sentient in awareness? There's no evidence for it. Human beings never think for themselves. They find it too uncomfortable. For the most part, members of our species simply repeat what they are told, and become upset if they are exposed to any different view. The characteristic human trait is not awareness, but conformity, and the characteristic result is religious warfare. Other animals fight for territory or food, but uniquely in the animal kingdom, human beings fight for their beliefs. The reason is that belief guides behavior, which was evolutionary important among human beings. But at the time when our behavior may well lead us to extinction, I see no reason to assume we have any awareness at all. We are stubborn, self-destructive conformists. Any other view of our species is just a self-congratulatory delusion. Next question. Now walking across the courtyard, Sarah Harding laughed.
They didn't care for that.
I admit it's discouraging, he said. But it can't be helped. He shook his head. These are some of the best scientists in the country and still, no interesting ideas. By the way, what's the story on that guy who interrupted me?
Richard Levine? Irritating, isn't he? He has a worldwide reputation for being a pain in the ass.
I say.
He's wealthy, is the problem. You know about the Becky dolls?
No, Malcolm said, giving her a glance.
Well, every little girl in America does. There's a series, Becky and Sally and Franz, and several more. They're American dolls. Levine is the heir of the company, so he's a smart-ass rich kid. Impetuous. Does whatever he wants.
Malcolm nodded. You have time for lunch?
Sure, I would be.
Dr. Malcolm! Wait up, please! Dr. Malcolm! Ah, shit. Dr. Malcolm, Levine said, coming up. I was surprised that you didn't take my proposal more seriously. How could I? It's absurd. Yes, but Miss Harding and I were just going to lunch, Malcolm said, gesturing to Sarah. Yes, but I think you should reconsider, Levine said, pressing on, because I believe my argument is valid. It is entirely possible, even likely, that dinosaurs still exist. You must know there are persistent rumors about animals in Costa Rica, where I believe you have spent time. Yes, in the case of Costa Rica, I can tell you, also in the Congo. For years, there have been reports of pygmies of large sauropod, perhaps even an apatosaur, in the dense forests around Bocambo. And also in the high jungles of Iriajaga, there is supposedly an animal the size of a rhino, which perhaps is a remnant of ceratopsian fantasies, Malcolm said. Pure fantasies. Nothing has ever been seen. No photographs, no hard evidence. Perhaps not, Levine said, but absence of proof is not proof of absence. I believe they may well be a locus of these animals, survivals from the past time. Anything is possible, but in point of fact, survival is possible. I keep getting calls about new animals in Costa Rica, remnants, fragments. Recently? Not for a while. Oh, I thought so. The last call was 9 months ago. I was in Siberia looking at a frozen baby mammoth, and I couldn't get back in time. But I was told it was some kind of very large, atypical lizard found dead in the jungles of Costa Rica. And? What happened to it? The remains were burned, so nothing is left? That's right. No photographs, no proof? Apparently not. So it's just a story, Malcolm said. Perhaps. But I believe it's worth mounting an expedition to find out about these reported survivals. Malcolm stared at him. An expedition? To find a hypothetical lost world? Who's going to pay for this? I am, Levine said. I have already begun the preliminary planning. But that could cause... I don't care what it costs, Levine said. The fact is, survival is possible. It has occurred in the Valley of Species from another general, and it may be that there are survivals from the Cretaceous as well. Fantasies. Malcolm said again, shaking his head. Levine paused and stared at Malcolm. Dr. Malcolm, he said, I must say I'm very surprised at your attitude. You have just presented a thesis, and I'm offering you a chance to prove it. I would have thought you would jump at the opportunity. My jumping days are over, Malcolm said. But instead of taking me up in this, I'm not interested in dinosaurs, Malcolm said. But everyone is interested in dinosaurs. Not me. He turned on his cane and started to walk off. By the way, Levine said, what were you doing in Costa Rica? I heard you were there for almost a year. I was lying in a hospital bed. They couldn't move me out of intensive care for 6 months. I couldn't even get on a plane. Yes, I know you got hurt. But what were you doing there in the first place? Weren't you looking for dinosaurs? Malcolm squinted at him in the bright sun and leaned on his cane. No, he said. I wasn't.
They were all three sitting at a small painted table in the corner of the Guadalupe Café on the other side of the river. Sarah Harding drank Corona from the bottle and watched the two men opposite her. Levine looked pleased to be with them, as if he had won some victory to be sitting at the table. Malcolm looked weary, like a parent who has spent too much time with a hyperactive child.
You want to know what I have heard? Levine said. I have heard that a couple of years back, a company named InGen genetically engineered some dinosaurs and put them on an island in Costa Rica. But something went wrong. A lot of people were killed, and the dinosaurs were destroyed. And nobody will talk about it because of some legal angle, non-disclosure agreements or something. And the Costa Rican government doesn't want to hurt tourism, so nobody will talk. That's what I have heard. Malcolm stared at him. And you believe that? Not at first I didn't, Levine said. But the thing is, I keep hearing it. The rumors keep flooding around. Supposedly you and Alan Grant and a bunch of other people went there. Did you ask Grant about it? I asked him last year at a conference in Peking. He said it was absurd. Malcolm nodded slowly. Is that what you say? Levine asked, drinking his beer. I mean, you know Grant, don't you? No. I never met him. So it is not true. Are you familiar with the concept of techno-myth? It was developed by Geller at Princeton. Basic thesis is that we have lost all the old myths, Orphans and Eurydice, and Perseus and Medusa. So we fill the gap with modern techno-myths. Geller listed a dozen or so. One is that aliens living at a hangar at White-Patterson Air Force Base. Another is that somebody invented a carburetor that gets 150 miles to the gallon, but the automobiles companies bought the patent and are sitting on it. Then there's the story that the Russians train children in an ESP at a secret base in Siberia, and these kids can kill people anywhere in the world with their thoughts. The stories that had lined in Nazca, Peru, are an alien spaceport. That the CIA released an AIDS virus to kill homosexuals. That Nikola Tesla discovered an incredible energy source, but his notes were lost. That in Istanbul there is 10th century drawings that shows the Earth from space. That the Stanford Research Institute found a guy whose body glows in dark. Get the picture? You're saying InGen's dinosaurs are a myth? Levine said. Of course they are. They have to be. Don't you think it's possible to genetically engineer a dinosaur? The experts all tell me it's not. And they are right, Malcolm said. He glanced at Harding, as if for a confirmation. She said nothing, just drank her beer. In fact, Harding knew something more about these dinosaur rumors. Once after surgery, Malcolm had been delirious, mumbling nonsense from the anesthesia and pain medication, and he had been seemingly fearful, twisting in the bed, repeating the names of several kinds of dinosaurs. Harding had asked the nurse about it. She said he was like that after every operation. The hospital staff assumed it was a drug-induced fantasy, yet it seemed to Harding that Malcolm was reliving some terrifying actual experience. The feeling was weighted by the slangy, familiar way Malcolm referred to the dinosaurs. He called them raptors, or compies, or trikes. He seemed especially fearful of the raptors. Later, when he was back home, she asked him about his delirium. He had just shrugged it off, making a bad joke. At least I didn't mention other women, did I? And then he made some comments about having been a dinosaur nut as a kid, and how illness made you regress. His whole attitude was elaborately indifferent, as if we're all unimportant. She had the distant feeling he was being invasive, but she wasn't inclined to push it. Those were the days when she was in love with him. her attitude indulgent. Now he was looking at her in a questioning way, as if to ask if she was going to contradict him. Harding just raised an eyebrow and stared back. He must have his reasons. She could wait him out. Levine leaned forward across the table towards Malcolm. So the InGen story is entirely untrue? Entirely untrue, Malcolm said, nodding gratefully. Malcolm had been denying the speculations for 3 years. By now, he was getting good at it. His wariness was no longer affected but genuine. In fact, he had been consulting to International Genetic Technologies at Palo Alto in the summer of 1989, and he had made a trip to Costa Rica for them, which was turned out disastrously. In the aftermath, everyone involved had moved quickly to quote a story. InGen wanted to limit its liability. The Costa Rican government wanted to preserve its reputation as a tourist paradise, and the individual scientists had been bound with non-disclosure agreement, abetting later by generous grants to continue their silence. In Malcolm's case, 2 years of medical bills had been paid by the company. Meanwhile, InGen's island facilities in Costa Rica had been destroyed. There was no longer any living creatures on the island. The company had hired the eminent Stanford Professor George Baselton, a biologist and atheist who frequent television appeared had made him a popular authority on scientific subjects. Baselton claimed to have visited the island and had been tireless in denying rumors that extinct animals have ever existed there. As time passed, interest in the story waned. InGen was long since bankruptcy. The principal investors in Europe and Asia had taken their losses. Although the company's physical assets, the building and lab equipment, would be sold piecemeal. The core technology that had been developed would, they decide, never be sold. In short, the InGen chapter was closed. There was nothing more to say. So there's no truth to it. To tell you the truth, Dr. Malcolm, that makes me feel better. Why? Malcolm said. Because it means that the remnants that keep turning up in Costa Rica must be real. Real dinosaurs. I've got a friend from Yale down there, a field biologist, and he said he has seen them. I believe him. I doubt that any more animals will turn up in Costa Rica. It's true there haven't been any for almost a year now. But if more show up, I'm going down there. And in the Interium, I have been giving a lot of thoughts to how it should be done. I think the special vehicles could be built and ready in a year. I have already talked to Dr. Thorne about it. Then I assemble a team, perhaps including Dr. Harding here, or a similarity accomplishment naturalist, or some graduate students. Malcolm listening, shaking his head. You think I'm wasting your time, Levine said. I do, yes. But suppose, just suppose, that animals started to show up again. Never happened. But suppose they did, Levine said. Would you be interested in helping me? To plan an expedition? Malcolm finished his meal and pushed his plate aside. He stared at Levine. Yes, he said finally. If animals started to show up again, I would be interested in helping you. Great, Levine said. That's all I wanted to know. Outside, in the bright sunlight of Guadalpalo Street, Malcolm walked with Sarah towards Malcolm's battered Ford sedan. Levine climbed into a bright red Ferrari, waved cheerfully, and roared off.
You think it will happen? That these, animals will start showing up again?
No, I'm quite sure they never will.
You sound hopeful.
The following day she went back to Africa. During the next 18 months, she had a rough sense of Levine's progress, since from time to time he called her with some question about field protocols, or vehicle tires, or the best anesthetic to use on animals in the wild. Sometimes she got a call from Doc Thorne, who was building the vehicles. He usually sounded harassed. From Malcolm she heard nothing at all, although he sent her a card on her birthday. It arrived a month late. He had scrawled at the bottom, "Have a happy birthday. Be glad you're nowhere near him. He's driving me crazy."